The steak hit the grill with a hiss, and the room tilted, like a carnival ride at the peak where you can see the lights of the whole town and feel your stomach suspend. He wore a fraying jacket and the expression of someone who'd learned how to carry hunger politely. When she slid the folded slip of paper under his palm, their fingers touched for half a heartbeat. He opened it and read a line that made the blood leave his face. "Don't eat this. Please. I can explain." Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. It was a Wednesday night at Marrow and Hearth, one of those places that tried to pretend it wasn't a chain by hanging mismatched paintings and letting the house plants grow a little wild. The brick walls remembered laughter. The tables remembered spilled drinks and whispered secrets. Nights were softer here. The lamplight was apologetic. He called himself James Rowe when he was wearing the third-hand coat and the boots with scuffs that mapped out forgotten miles. His red hair was flattened with rain, his jaw was shadowed, and his eyes were the complicated color of winter water. He'd walked here because 2 blocks of sidewalk in the drizzle made a better alibi than a chauffeured car that could be recognized by too many people. The girl, no, not a girl, a woman with a tired, brave mouth and a ponytail that had been redone in the bathroom with wet fingers, set down a cracked leather menu and tried not to flinch when the manager's laugh from the bar cut across the room like a coin dropping into a slot. "Kitchen's closing, but we can still do steak," she said, voice pitched in that careful staff tone. In another universe, her voice might have belonged to someone who read aloud for a living. "Medium. Rare." "House recommends?" James asked, heart thumping in that strange way it did whenever he stepped fully into the part. The air smelled like rosemary, like butter and heat, like something to tear into with teeth and call it satisfaction. "Medium," she said, and her mouth tightened almost imperceptibly, with a side of fries and the green beans. "Medium," he agreed. She wrote it on an order ticket and folded it into a square smaller than a sweetness and slid it under his palm as she set down the water. She didn't glance at him again, but he could feel her focus like a held breath. He unfolded it and found the handwriting a little jagged, urgent, blue ink pressed hard enough to leave marks on the paper underneath. "Don't eat this, please. I can explain. If you're not with them, you need to listen. Wait after close. Back alley by the dumpster." It wasn't the first note Jameson Blackwood had ever held with shaking fingers, but it was the first in a long time to scare him. He swallowed, folded the paper into his fist, and forced himself to look like a careless man making careless choices. In the kitchen window, he saw a flash of the manager's grin, Gregory Finch, tie loosened past the point of professionalism, a coat that pretended it had cost more than his conscience. Finch would say "kid" to the cooks and "sweetheart" to the waitresses and "sir" to any man in a jacket that looked like it came from a downtown boutique. He thought he was charming. He forgot charm was a mountain built on respect, not fear. Rosemary. The name tag said Rosie, but you could tell by the spine of her that she hated diminutives, handled tables like someone doing triage, who needed the extra bread, who needed a joke, who needed a minute to cry into their drink. She refilled his water, and when the plate slid into the window, she didn't look at him. She looked at the steak. And if Jameson weren't the man he was, he might not have seen the microscopic shake of her head. He'd been 13 when his mother taught him the first rule of having more money than other people. Sometimes invisibility buys you better truth than a spotlight. He'd practiced vanishing ever since, at prep schools and board meetings, in kitchens and construction sites, at the back of the crowd where the jokes were rougher, and the stories wore no suits. Jameson Blackwood, owner of Blackwood Ventures, benefactor of a dozen foundations, had come here tonight to measure integrity in the smallest of ways. He usually did it quietly. He didn't expect to walk into the kind of storm that changes weather patterns under your skin. He cut into the meat anyway because to push the plate away would be theater and theater would draw eyes. He brought a bite to his mouth and let the butter and char and the iron-slick gloss of blood brush his tongue without swallowing, letting the flavor bloom and tell him what it had to say. Meat like this, scented right, sizzling at the right temperature, could lie to you. It could be old as a grudge and still come in searing and smiling. He wiped his mouth and smiled like a man momentarily content. When he looked up, Rosemary was across the room, holding a tray, listening to a couple's argument with that alert compassion you cannot fake. The soft lamplight kissed her cheekbones. But she kept glancing back, a tiny needle on a compass magnetized to the wrong north. He finished his water and left a tip too small to be remembered. He put his hands in his pockets and walked into the rain. Behind Marrow and Hearth, the alley held a different chemistry. Oil, damp cardboard, the yeasty smell of bread delivered too late. The dumpster wore a green lid, and the graffiti scars of kids who knew nothing is more permanent than temporary vandalism. She came out the back door 10 minutes later with a cluster of servers and the last of the cooks. The manager stood at the threshold pretending to be a man who took care of his people. There was laughter. There were barely smokes shared like communion. Rosemary lingered at the edge like a shadow. Gregory Finch flicked ash too close to her hair. "Get home safe, Rosie," he said, not noticing that his hand had taken her elbow, not noticing that she had peeled her arm away as if from heat. "I'll lock up," he added in a tone polished with practiced benevolence. "I can," she started. "I said I'll lock up," he repeated, teeth showing. People who smile with their teeth always think you won't look at their eyes. They drifted away in pairs, shoulders hunched against the rain. Rosemary slipped down the alley like a thought she hadn't meant to think. "Did you eat it?" she said without preamble, voice low. "What happens if I say yes?" He asked. She looked at him for the first time the way you look at a witness whose testimony could set your brother free. "Then we hope the kitchen cleaned the grill enough tonight, and we hope you have the kind of luck that makes dogs follow you around for no reason." "Are you being dramatic for effect, Rosemary?" He hadn't meant to use her full name. He took refuge in the role. "Is this a game?" She took a breath that sounded like it had two kinds of wolves in it. "I don't know you, but I know you're not with him. I know you're not the sort that tells lies to your own eyes to get by, and I know that steak." She closed her eyes for a second. "I know it wasn't safe." "How do you know?" He asked softer. "I grew up in a kitchen," she said, and her mouth softened around the truth. "My mother kept 3 kids alive on tips and recipes she learned kneeling on a chair watching other people cook. I know what meat looks like when it's tired. I know what meat looks like when it's already been cut once and glued together and frozen again. I can smell death that ain't supposed to be there. And yet you served it," he said, letting the hardness into his voice so he could see what it did to her. She flinched. "I gave you a note," she said, "and I'm giving you more than that now because he—" She jerked her chin toward the glowing rectangle of the kitchen door. "Because he is going to kill somebody or ruin a family and I won't be able to sleep after that." Her hands were cold. She rubbed them together and he noticed, mercilessly, the absence of a ring. He noticed the cheap, sturdy shoes. He noticed the raggedness of the hem at her cuffs where she'd unpicked and restitched it once already. "I tried to go to the owner," she said. She said it like a fairy tale. "But he's a ghost. He exists in emails and nice letters and a photo on the wall. Finch says we're lucky. Finch says jobs are jobs and sometimes the meat doesn't come labeled right and anyway, what's a little bleach wash between friends?" "You told the health department?" Jameson asked. He felt something waking up inside him, a creature that remembered grief. "I started an email," she said, shame swift and hot in her face. "And then Finch called me into the office and he knew. He knew what I'd typed. He had printouts of my brother's medical bills. He told me he could lose my files in the system and it would be a real shame if Ellie's treatments got delayed because the hospital never got my paperwork. And did I know how fragile the timeline is for kids like that?" And he laughed. She put her hand to her teeth, as if to hold back something she couldn't afford to let out. My stepfather owes him money for a backroom poker night. Finch says the debt is mine now because I walked into this job asking for cash advances when I was desperate. He says he made me. He says I should be grateful. Illy? A boy, inevitably. A list of doctors, a number you could barely say out loud. What do you want me to do? Jameson said, and his voice had the kind of quiet that makes people stop. He had spent a lifetime giving orders from a room where coffee cost the same as a loaf of bread and nobody cried at work. It was good to have the question in his mouth again. She looked at him carefully, weighing her hunger against his pockets. I want you to be who I'm asking you to be, she said. Somebody who walks into a place like this and hears when something is screaming without sound. He took a breath and stepped closer, felt the alley tighten around them. My name is James, he said, choosing the smaller truth. I know people. I can get the meat tested. I can tell a health inspector friendly to the word emergency. I can make sure your brother's file doesn't walk off a desk into a trash can, but I have to ask you, you have proof. She reached into her apron's deep pocket and brought out a cheap phone with a cracked screen. She'd been fearless enough to be careful. She had taken photographs, the case of meat boxes stacked wrong, the vendor label in the corner with numbers that told a certain kind of story. A ledger page snapped with the camera half in her hand and half in her pocket, crooked but legible. A list of purchases that didn't match the menu's prices, expenses that weren't expenses. And an audio clip, a purloined minute of Finch's voice. Wash the top pieces. If the color's wrong, marinade covers a multitude of sins. The rest goes out back for the stray cats, or the compactor, but not before you weigh it as waste for the tax forms. Her hand shook and the clip fuzzed with her pulse. Jameson nodded, every cell in him rearranging. It should have been simple. It never was. Give me a day, he said. 2 at most. I'm going to make a call. Don't do anything that could put you in a room alone with him. If he presses, tell him you'll pay the next installment on your debt tomorrow and you're going to ask your church for help or your mother's friend for a loan. Lie like a person who hates lying. Can you do that? I hate lying, she said, but I'm good at it when I have to be. There's one more thing, he added. What? Don't trust anyone who tells you they own the truth, he said and didn't explain. The people who have it keep it in their pocket like a coin. The people who are telling the truth are usually just trying to keep their head above water. Like you, she asked. He smiled with only one half of his mouth. I've drowned before, he said. I can hold my breath a while. He walked into rain and away from himself. Around the corner, under a bodega awning, his car waited like a secret he couldn't confess. The driver had been sent home. He unlocked it himself, slid behind the wheel and dialed. A click and then, Arthur. Don't ask questions, Jameson said. I need a lab running at 2 a.m. I need a quiet legal chain of custody and a courier with gloves and a clean conscience. And I need you to pull every contract we have with anything that smells like beef within 3 degrees of marrow and hearth supply chain. Arthur sighed, that principled sigh he'd perfected over a decade of not quite letting Jameson ruin both their lives out of impulse. I'm guessing we're not talking about your latest version of humility theater. We're talking about a kid named Ali who might not get his treatment because a man is using contaminated product to pad his numbers, Jameson said. We're talking about a manager named Gregory Finch who thinks marinades are absolution. There was a beat where Jameson could see Arthur take off his glasses and pinch the bridge of his nose. I'll call Wren, Arthur said. You should tell me if you're doing this as Jameson or as your alter ego because the rules change when you take the mask off. Mask stays on for now, Jameson said, but the money doesn't have to. Pull what you need. Wren can be there in 20, Arthur said. Do not do anything heroic in the interim. You have a board meeting at 8. I will if they take long enough to deserve it, Jameson said and hung up. Wren was a kind of miracle he had learned to be grateful for without trying to own. She arrived quiet and appeared suddenly, like a shadow that had discovered how to open doors. She wore a coat that had too many pockets for a life that didn't involve smuggling hope or weapons, hair scraped back so it wouldn't catch even a whisper of light. She slid into the passenger seat and raised an eyebrow. "Meet," he said. "Not your usual kind of club," she replied mildly. "Who's the canary?" "Her name's Rosemary," he said, and Wren's mouth twitched. "Of course it is. You know I hate when stories write themselves." "I need you to get the parcel out," he said. She nodded. "We take a sample from the dumpster. There will be something. If not, we go in the back, films of the cooler, check product codes, log the temperature gauge. We could go official with the inspectors and do a midnight raid, but that will tip the manager and he'll broom the floors of it all." "He's already uneasy," Jameson said. "He knew about an email she didn't send. He's rifling her life." "Then we treat him like a man about to set a fire," Wren said. She looked at him and tilted her head slightly. "You have the look." "What look?" "The look you got when your sister called you last year because Gran's doctor missed something," she said. "The look that thinks money is a good and necessary hammer and the world is full of nails." He didn't flinch. She was too right too often. "Just get us proof," he said. "Proof will do what it always does," Wren said, fingers dancing across her phone screen as she called in quiet favors. "Less than we want, more than anyone else thought possible." Inside, while Wren coaxed contaminated truths out of bags and boxes and metal shelves, Rosemary was caught in a conversation that tasted like chewing on foil. Finch had a way of leaning back in his chair that said the best seats in the house belonged to him, and no one else could sit without his permission. "You look tense tonight," he observed as he shuffled papers he didn't need to look at. "I'm fine," she said, measuring her breath. "You had a man at table 12, he said, and let the words loop out like a fishing line. "Did I?" she asked, voice neutral. "Was he rude? Did he dine and dash? Should I chase him down and ask for a Yelp review?" Finch smiled. He did, she had to admit, have a nice set of teeth. "You've been coming up short," he said. He slid a photocopy across the desk, an image of numbers that didn't care about her heart. "You know the policy. Breakage, walkouts, discounts you give your sad friends who cry about birthdays they can't afford, you cover it. It's generous of me, really. Other places just fire people." The lies were hard to hold. She swallowed them like unsalted broth. "I'll pay this week," she said. My brother." "Family is important," he said, with the solemnity of a lone actor on a stage he'd built himself. "I'm family to you, Rosie. I don't take this out of your check because I like hurting you. I do it so you learn, so you have muscles where some people have excuses. You want a loan. You know who to ask. I give to the people who put in the hours. I expect something back." He let the silence stretch. There were always strings. They tied themselves around wrists and ankles and throats and called themselves safety nets. She nodded once because she'd learned that refusing looked like guilt and compliance looked like innocence. "I'll figure it out," she said. Her voice sounded like a haunted house with the lights on. "You always do," he said, and slid another paper across, a form stamped in red with a polite headline about non-disclosure and a paragraph about consequences. "Just a formality. This protects us. It protects you too. You don't want to get involved in things that aren't your business. Leave the supplier conversations to the adults." She looked at the line where her name should go, and her hand wanted to write and her hand wanted to break the pen. She put the pen down. "I need to think," she said. "You have until 9 a.m. to decide if you're a team player," he said. "The hospital calls start at 9. She flinched. That was the move. Always mention a child when you want to unspool a woman's strength. At 3 in the morning, in a lab whose lights never learned how to sleep, Arthur stood in a blue tie he kept in his desk for emergencies he refused to call emergencies. He watched through glass as a technician examined wet samples that told their own rough poem. "Listeria," the tech said, voice clinical to keep the night at bay. "An account of bacteria that should never have had the right to congregate." "Chain of custody is clean?" Arthur asked. Cleaner than the meat, the text said. Arthur texted Wren. Wren texted Jameson. Jameson stared at the word and let memories round the edges. His mother handing him a sandwich. A summer carnival where he learned how long lines meant something cheap was passing itself off as something precious. "It's always the corners that get missed," she used to say, wiping counters as if virtue could be polished into a surface. "Look at the corners." He looked at the corners. He saw the vendor logo in the photographs Rosemary had taken. He saw the code that told him where the meat had been, and he felt the twist come like a cold wind. Overland Group. A holding company that moved like a shark swallowing smaller companies, wearing them like borrowed suits. Overland Group, who had 6 months ago taken a minority position in a processing plant. Overland Group, whose largest investor quietly, insistently, was Blackwood Ventures. He sat very still and had the sensation of falling without moving. He had never been two men more fiercely than he was in that minute, the one who wanted to hide an embarrassment from his board and the one who wanted to set his own house on fire for heat enough to melt the shadow off anyone's fear. He called Arthur. Arthur answered with, "I'm thinking what you're thinking." "We're in it," Jameson said. "Not directly, but enough to smell like clothes after a bonfire." "We bought in as a way to bring standards," Arthur said, voice clipped. "We thought we'd fix from the inside." "Fixing from the inside is how people teach themselves to live in caves," Jameson said evenly. "We're not going to rationalize this. Press or authorities first?" Arthur asked, like a man setting out a battlefield with 2 fronts and too few soldiers. "Authorities," Jameson said. "Then press. If we get ahead of this, it's not a story about what we didn't see. It's a story about what we refuse to ignore, and get our lawyers to motion for a freeze on payoffs in the Marrow and Hearth system. Finch likes debt contracts. Get them invalidated." "And the girl?" Arthur asked. "She's a woman," Jameson corrected, aware of the old habit of diminishing. "We protect her. We clear her brother's bills. We move them if we have to, new hospital, new city. And we find out who Finch has in the hospital who tells him things he has no right to know." Wren's text popped up, his phone's a garden, calling in the bees. She'd gotten a grab of Finch's device using a shamelessly simple trick. Hand him a paper to sign. Set her phone near his. Let them fall into conversation like neighbors over a fence. Finch, secure in his kingdom, had offered help with a problem he assumed she had. He loved to be needed. His phone had vomited its records into Wren's trap in 90 seconds flat. Within an hour, Wren had a series of messages from a contact named HM. The text thread ran like a long, oily rope, HM telling Finch when to expect shipments, what to do when meat didn't pass a sniff test. HM reminding Finch of their arrangement you receive. "We pretend to follow the rules. Everyone gets a bonus." "Who is HM?" Jameson asked. "Hospital management," Wren said softly, reading the messages with that tilt of head she got when hunting. "Or someone who wants him to think that. But there's a photo in here. Selfies never lie." She turned the screen. A woman in a neat suit with a name badge. Her smile had the shape of a secret she'd been holding in her mouth too long. The badge had the hospital's logo. Her name, Heather Marlowe. Patient intake. Jameson thought of Rosemary's flinch at 9 a.m. He thought about the woman who smiled like a friend. "We get Heather," he said, "and we cut Finch at the knees." "We move now?" Arthur asked. "We move," Jameson said. At 5 in the morning, as a thin gray hammered away at the night like a persistent child with a spoon against a pot, Rosemary was arrested. It was as simple as a man walking in with a badge and Finch's theatrical sigh and a bag of money found in her locker. The money smelled like the bleach that cleaned tables. It smelled like trap. Her mouth tasted like pennies. Ellie's name sat on the officer's clipboard, highlighted. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer said, and the words felt like kindness for once. She nodded and swallowed the urge to start explaining her life in paragraphs. She didn't call Finch. She didn't call her stepfather who would be asleep. wasted, or both. She didn't call her mother, who would pick up and say darling, and be hit by a semi of fear. She thought of James and his winter water eyes, and she didn't have a number. She sat in a room that took care to be boring. She watched a clock that loved itself too much to hurry. She listened to the slow thunder of her own heart. Then the door opened, and a woman with capable hands and kindness disguised as briskness slid into the chair opposite her like a dancer who knew where the real center of gravity was. "Rosemary?" she asked. "Yes," she said, and braced. "My name is Wren," the woman said. "You can breathe now." Rosemary did, and startled herself with how good oxygen was. "James sent me," Wren said. "He is not what he seems, which is lucky for both of you. He's arranged your bail, he's arranged your brother's care, and he's arranged a world of trouble for the man who thinks he owns you." "He can't," Rosemary started, because the raw muscle of skepticism had built itself inside her like a second skeleton. "He can't be the guy with a checked shirt and a half-smile who eats alone. He can't. We're all more than what we look like when we get off a double shift," Wren said, and there was no pity in it. "You did a brave thing. Now we're going to take the hit and turn it." Rosemary laughed once, a cracked sound, and put her forehead on her hands for a moment. When she looked up, Wren was studying the mirror that was not a mirror on the wall. "I've been in that room," Wren said. "The one behind the glass. I'm glad to be on this side today." "Why are you helping me?" Rosemary asked, not ungrateful, just wanting to name the shape of the stranger who had sat down and called it all a plan. Wren's eyes softened in a way that made you know softness was hard-won. "Years ago," she said, "I left a grocery store with a bag of spinach supposed to be the healthy choice. My son ate it in the backseat, sneaking handfuls like it was contraband. We spent the night in a hospital. He lived. Someone else's boy didn't. I decided I didn't want to belong to any story that let a load of money convince itself it weighed more than a life." Rosemary nodded as if she remembered a tune from a dream. "Okay," she said, and the word felt like a step into open air with someone else's hand holding yours. They walked out of the station together. The rain had finished its song. The sky looked like an apology that needed better words. The plan unfolded not like a ballet but like scaffolding. There was purpose, yes, and the shape of a building taking form. There were also the creaks and sudden shifts that remind you Wood remembers forests. Jameson met them in an office he usually used for failing companies and brilliant ideas that needed someone to believe in them long enough to become math. He'd showered. He had put himself back on. The James he had worn like a coat was folded on a chair in the corner, boots and jacket, and a note in his pocket he hadn't moved because talismans lose power if you disrespect them. When Rosemary saw him, she went still. Not because he was suddenly clean and expensive, because in his face she saw the person behind the mask and realized she had been talking to him all along. "You," she said. "Me," he agreed. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you last night. The mask is a tool, not a lie, but it still feels like lying." "Who are you?" she asked, though she knew because the office told his story before his mouth could. "Jameson Blackwood," he said. "I own the company that owns Marrow and Hearth. I came to test our culture, to listen in the corners. I found more than I planned to. That is good. It is also my fault it has been there long enough to find." "You own," she started and stopped. Her mouth curved around the shape of rage and gratitude, and she chose neither. "Okay," she said finally, that good old word doing the work it always had, a bridge thrown over a canyon with no time to measure weight limits. He told her everything. Overland Group, Heather Marlowe, the lab, the authorities Wren had already called to set a trap. Arthur joined them and added caution where Jameson added flame. Wren added routes where Jameson added destination. By noon, Finch had gotten a message from HM. "Change of plans. Meet in the parking garage. We need to talk." By 1, the garage smelled like hot tires and the stale tea of panic. Finch had come in a suit he'd never had occasion to deserve. He had a briefcase because villains always brought briefcases to their own downfall. Heather Marlowe stepped out of a silver sedan and looked like money and fear dressed her alike. She smiled. Finch smiled. Cameras watched from car visors and collar buttons. "You told me it was clean," Finch said without greeting, because people who hold secrets forget their manners first. "I told you it was cheap," Heather said, and then looked over Finch's shoulder and tried to recalibrate when uniformed men started to become the horizon. "Gregory Finch," a voice echoed. "Heather Marlowe, we'd like a word." Finch ran. He didn't make it to the exit ramp. Wren stepped out from behind a pillar and set one hand on his briefcase and one on his chest and moved him as easily as a chess piece. He saw her for the first time and decided not to pick that fight. Heather tried to talk past the handcuffs. It didn't work. Nothing works once you've said the wrong words out loud and someone has put them on paper. In Finch's office, while they counted cash he kept for debts he said belonged to others, the fire began. Later, he would say it was an accident. Later, he would say a cigar met a rag in a cart and neither of them could help it. But fire tells its own story, and investigators read it like the children of arsonists. The smoke alarm went off while Arthur was on the line with their lawyer making noises about consent decrees and asset freezes. The alarm cut through the conversation wickedly, like the old bell in the church Jameson had grown up hating from the pew where he learned to hold still. "Kitchen," Wren said. "Where still live." They were 3 blocks away. Jameson didn't wait for fire trucks. He ran the red light like a man who had decided rules were only manners when the house wasn't on fire. Marrow and Hearth exhaled smoke like a dragon with a moral problem. Staff had evacuated, coughing into napkins, faces gray with soot, and the sudden adrenaline of their jobs burning. "Rosemary?" Jameson asked because he didn't see her. "She said she forgot her bag," a busboy gasped. He didn't think. He moved toward the smoke with a hatred of scenarios that ended with a woman's name turned into an epitaph. Inside, the air carried knives. He pushed through heat that made him think of deserts, of years he'd tried to be kind to money and had learned money wasn't kind back. He found her in the storage room, shoulder against a door that had jammed when heat warped it. "I couldn't get it open," she coughed, eyes streaming. She had her phone in one hand and her other hand wrapped in her apron where he later saw blood. He put his shoulder against the wood and pushed. The door gave with the moan of old houses and things held shut too long. They stumbled out into what used to be daylight. Someone handed them bottles of water. Wren appeared out of smoke like a character from a book that hadn't been written yet and caught Rosemary with both hands. "You came back for your bag?" Wren asked. Rosemary laughed and coughed. "Not that bag," she said. She held up the ledger covered in soot and wrapped in a wet towel. Everything, between the pages. He hid the bad numbers in margins like they were shame. Jameson looked at her, impressed with the way courage had knitted itself under her skin like bone. He looked at the building. He looked at the fire, and he made a choice before his lawyers could tell him not to. At 6 in the evening, with the restaurant cordoned off and the smoke smell already colonizing their clothes, he stood in front of a row of microphones. He hated microphones. He loved their effect when used well. "I own this place," he said before anyone could turn ownership into a stick to hit him with. "And right now it has owners it doesn't deserve. That's on me. We work hard to make sure you're served food that won't hurt you and by people who aren't being hurt to keep their jobs. We failed. Tonight, we're owning that failure. We're working with the authorities to make sure anyone responsible for playing loose with your safety is held accountable. And we've begun the process of disentangling our money from companies that profit when you're trusting them not to." A reporter with hair that had learned to be a helmet lifted a hand. "Were you aware of tainted products in your supply chain?" "I was aware we were trying to make it better," Jameson said, and refused to let the sentence be a shield. "I was not aware that trying isn't the same as changing. Now I am." "Is it true your employee, Rosemary Lane, was arrested this morning?" "She was set up," he said, and watched the news trucks turn their heads like hunting dogs. The charges are being dropped as we speak. A man who should have been protecting his staff instead used them to paper his own greed. That ends now. What about the fire? Another asked. Accidents happen when every day is an accident waiting and when desperation tries to turn time into a friend, he said carefully. The investigators will tell you the rest. When it was over, he walked away from the cameras like a man stepping off a ship he had built with his own hands, laughing at the notion it might not sink on its maiden voyage. Back in the quiet, he found Rosemary sitting on a milk crate behind the barricade. She was wrapped in a blanket someone had produced, hair damp, lips chapped. "You look like someone who needs a nap and a drink in that order," he said gently. She smiled without showing teeth. "You look like someone who just got taller," she said, "just slightly." "You saved lives," he said. "No," she said. "I just wrote a note." "Notes change worlds," he said softly. "So do the hands that pass them." He reached in his pocket and pulled out her note. It had survived sweat and rain and smoke. The ink had run like tears, but the words were there. He handed it to her because talismans have to be shared to work. She looked at it, and without knowing why, put it to her heart for a second. "My mother always said sometimes the only weapon you get is your own voice," she said. "And sometimes that leaves your mouth on paper." "Your mother sounds like my mother," he said. She looked up sharply. "Is that a proposition?" "It's an offering," he said. "I have a position that needs filling. It comes with the kind of power that scares me to hand to anyone but also makes me hopeful when I think of handing it to you, Director of Ethical Practices. You'd oversee the supply chain and the policies that keep people honest when nobody's watching. You'll be the person in the corner looking at corners. You'll have authority that doesn't go away when it becomes inconvenient." She laughed like a tired soldier. "You want me to tell you no," she said. "I want you to tell me what you want," he said. "I want to not be terrified every time my brother coughs," she said. "I want to pay bills without praying over numbers. I want to never pour bleach on a piece of meat and call it dinner. I want for other people to not have to do this ever." She took a breath that made room for a future. "I accept, but if I take this job, I get to get weird." "Weird?" he asked. "Weird about rules," she said. "Weird about people who say team player like a muzzle. Weird about how we decide what matters. If you tell me to stop being weird, I hand you back the badge and go somewhere I can keep being myself." He nodded, relief coming like a wave that had finally gotten permission to hit the shore. "You be as weird as you need," he said. Arthur wandered over and looked at them like a man witnessing a blueprint become a building. "The charges are dropped," he announced softly. "Heather is in custody. Finch is negotiating and doing a terrible job of it. The hospital's HR wants to talk about protocols they swear they had but forgot to enforce." "Illy?" Rosemary asked. "Moved already," Arthur said. "A new hospital, quietly. An arm's-length trust paying the bills so it looks like nobody swooped in with a cape. He deserves to be a boy, not a story." She swallowed and tilted her head because you cannot say thank you with your mouth when your heart has filled it too full. "Can I call him?" she asked. "Wren's making sure his room is stocked with better snacks than the one he's in now," Arthur said. "She will likely steal him from you if you're not careful." "Wren won't," Wren said, appearing with a coffee she handed to Rosemary despite knowing better than to drug an adrenaline crash with caffeine. "But I called in a clown with a good face paint game. He'll be fine." The weeks that followed were messy, tedious, righteous. Investigations walked with careful feet. The public moved in waves: outrage, compassion, boredom, another story. Jameson and Arthur sat in rooms that smelled like expensive carpet and stale coffee, and told men and women with cautious hair that ownership is a verb. They sold off the overland stake with a pen that didn't shake. They created a new division with a budget that would make a politician weep, built not for show but for unglamorous work. Rosemary moved through an office and didn't apologize for not knowing where the coffee filters lived. She hired a scientist who had gotten fired from another company for refusing to manipulate numbers. She hired a former health inspector who'd been too good at his job to keep it under an administration that wanted to use the budget for parties. She hired two single mothers with noses like bloodhounds who could smell a lie under a layer of perfume. She visited factories unannounced so often that word went out. Blackwood's people would rather miss a flight than let you walk them past a corner without stopping to look into it. She went to see Heather's boss, and he did not like being visited by the person he'd almost devoured through his subordinate. She told him hospital intake should never be a back channel for secrets. She told him if his people leaked, they would face consequences crafted with imagination and history. At night, she went home to Ely. She threw away the stack of envelopes that used to look like bullets. She sat on the couch and watched cartoons with him, and sometimes she fell asleep in a way that didn't look like surrender for the first time in her life. Ely found the guitar Jameson had sent as a non-apology and started plucking at it with fingers that discovered the world had notes not written by hospitals. He wrote a song about meat that was actually funny. He called Jameson JB because he said that was the right name for a billionaire trying to be a human. He called Wren Operator because she always knew what to press to make things happen. Jameson took hits. A lawsuit here, a suspicious board member there. He stepped off his own platform in one place where he realized his vision had been blinding rather than illuminating. He did it without fanfare, and the papers only half paid attention. He learned to sleep again, badly, but not because of guilt this time. He visited Marrow and Hearth after the renovation. New manager, new supplier, new photographs on the wall. In the corner there was a frame around a folded piece of paper with smudged blue ink. There was no plaque to explain it. If you asked the staff, they'd tell you the story in snippets. A man, a woman, a note, a thing that burned and a thing that didn't. He sat at a table and ordered steak. The waitress laughed and said, "Medium." He said yes, and the plate came, and it was safe, simple, honest. He looked up when someone stepped into his light. Rosemary stood there in jeans and a blazer because she had learned that the clothes didn't matter when people could feel the spine under them. She looked like she belonged every place she walked into. "Spying?" she asked. "Trusting," he said. She smiled. "Weird enough yet for you." "Not even close," he said. "I'm starting to believe weird is the only way anything changes." She sat down without asking. They didn't always ask anymore. They had earned the right to assume company. "I've been thinking," she said, tracing a circle on the table with her finger the way kids trace constellations on fogged windows. "Dangerous," he murmured. "I've been thinking about how we start with plates and end with people," she said. "How what goes into our mouths becomes our blood, and what goes into our days becomes our character. I want to take this bigger." "Bigger how?" he asked. "School cafeterias," she said. "Prisons. Old folks' homes. Places where people are fed without asking what's on the plate because they trust us. We hold those places like we hold babies, and we don't let men like Finch into the room with them." He looked at her and felt a thing like awe. "Okay," he said. "Write me a plan that scares me and teach me why it's the kind worth being scared of." "I already did," she said, and slid a folder across that looked too modest to hold the weight it did. "You'll read it even if it's not in your job description." "I'll read it because you wrote it," he said simply. She nodded and stood, and he saw she had a mark on her wrist where the fire had kissed her. "Sometimes I think about the night in the alley," she said, turning the folded note over in her pocket like a coin. "What if I hadn't written it? What if you had eaten? What if I had been too afraid? It takes my breath away." "Then we pass the breath along," he said. "Someone else's lungs need it." He watched her leave and felt the world adjust one notch toward true. Months later, after trials and deals and days full of small righteous acts, Jameson stood with Rosemary at a hospital window, watching Ellie kick a soccer ball down a corridor. He would be discharged tomorrow. The nurse had rolled her eyes and let him. The ball thumped a slow heartbeat against the far wall and rolled back like it knew the way. Rosemary took a breath that sounded like gratitude had learned how to be quiet. "You know the note?" she asked, fingers worrying the corner of the paper that now lived in her wallet behind her driver's license, and a photograph of a mother whose face forgot to teach itself tragedy. "I think about it," he said. "I wrote more on the back," she said. "I didn't even remember until this morning." He tilted his head. She handed it to him. He unfolded the paper with the reverence you give to relics. The ink on the back had bled into the fibers like a bruise, but the words came through. "Don't be what they think you are." He looked at her. "I wrote it for you," she said softly, "and for me, because I thought you were the kind of man who would eat anything you were served and call it survival. And I knew I was the kind of woman who would serve anything she was told and call it obedience. I decided I wasn't, and I wanted you to have that too, even if you threw the note away. Even if you never read that side." He turned the paper over in his hand. He thought of the ways he had been what they thought he was: boy king, private plane, smiling philanthropist, polite storm. He thought of what he had not been, what he might be. He folded the note back the way it had been and gave it to her. "Keep it," he said. "It's more true in your pocket than it would be in a frame." They stood and watched till he kicked the ball again. It thumped and rolled. The sound was ordinary and perfect. "People think money makes you brave," Rosemary said after a while. "It doesn't. It makes the floor less likely to hurt when you fall, but bravery, that's always the same. It's notes in an alley and walking into burning rooms and telling a room full of men in suits you're going to do the right thing even if it looks wrong on a quarterly report." He smiled. "Then here's to bad quarters and good nights," he said. "Here's to weird. Here's to notes." She laughed and bumped his shoulder with hers. They stood like friends who had sworn a very quiet oath. Outside, rain started again, soft, insistent. The city sighed like it had been holding its breath and now remembered how to exhale. In a kitchen somewhere, a cook threw away a piece of meat that didn't smell like life. In an office somewhere, a woman crossed out a word in a memo and replaced it with one that meant what it said. In the alley behind Marrow and Hearth, the dumpster's graffiti bled into itself, and new paint covered the old names, like prayers written over other prayers. The back door, once jammed, now swung open easily because someone had oiled the hinges. It turned out that small things could be changed with hands that had once been used for carrying trays and signing checks. The world didn't become perfect. It became slightly more honest. It became a place where a waitress could be a director and a millionaire could be a man with smoke in his hair and a wallet with someone else's words in it. Sometimes, late at night, when the restaurant had emptied and the floor gleamed like certainty, the staff would gather at the bar, and someone new would point to the framed slip of paper in the corner and ask. And someone older would say that's our origin story. That's when we stopped pretending we didn't know better. They'd clink glasses and someone would whisper like a spell, "Here's to notes passed in the dark. Here's to hands that take them. Here's to choosing what we are."